Hi, everyone. How are you? This is Latoya from Amana Bible Institute. We are going to get started on our webinar entitled Homosexuality, Biblical or Not, really soon. Just allow me to share to my pages. And if you can help me do that as well, that would be great. Please share to your pages. Let people know that we are on. We're going to start soon. Just sharing to my pages. Please help me out by sharing to yours. I do want to also reiterate that we are on YouTube and Facebook Live. And we also have this virtual classroom that you can RSVP for free and come right on in almost instantaneously. So please also do that. Okay, just give me one more moment. I need to open up Facebook so that I can respond to your beautiful comments or not so beautiful. Today is a interesting topic, very controversial in some ways. And I want you to feel free to make comments as usual. We're going to go ahead and start. Let's see if I can fix that up there. Okay, so once again, welcome. My name is Latoya Leary. I'm the founder and president of Amana Bible Institute. And we are just a Bible institute that really encourages lifelong learning. We offer classes in a variety of topics, including, biblical studies, biblical languages, ministry, arts, ministry in the arts, leadership, entrepreneurship, and we will be growing from there. So please do look at our website, www.amanabibleinstitute.org or .net, both are ours, and see what you can find there. We do have a free course, and outside of our free courses, we have quite a few affordable course options, and we offer new courses every single month. So this webinar is one of our hashtag Real Talks webinar, which means that instructors will typically come on and we will just have a random conversation about a particular topic. Today, for now, it's just me. You might find instructors trail on in a little late, but it's just me today and you. So hopefully you can help fill that gap by going ahead and talking with me and letting me know what you think on the matter. I would love your input. I see that we do have someone on YouTube. We do have someone on Facebook. So please do comment and help me share. Now, these conversations in themselves, these Real Talk webinars are not very well developed, meaning we develop a topic, we think on these topics, but we're really just doing a brain dump and letting you know what we think on the matter, what we know on the matter. So these are not webinars that come with a full PowerPoint presentation and lecture notes. That's not what these Real Talk webinars are. They're just really candid conversations on the topic matter. I do have some Greek in here, though, for you, maybe a little bit of Hebrew that I might discuss. But these are just candid conversations. So please, please, please feel free to make comments and help me in this conversation. So I want to ask if anyone on our social media is bold enough to answer, when you think of homosexuality in the Bible, which texts in the Bible come to mind? What have you heard? So I'll give you a few minutes. Just curious if anyone has an idea or have in mind what text they've heard on the topic matter, on the subject matter. So one of the texts that almost instantly comes to mind is the Old Testament, right? A lot of people think of the Hebrew Bible when they think of this topic, but it's actually more so the case that more texts in the New Testament, the Greek New Testament, actually discuss this matter. But when people think of the Hebrew Bible, they instantly think Leviticus. It screams aloud, really loudly, and this is the thing. There are some things that we have to acknowledge that the Bible discusses and some things that the Bible does not have much discussion on. And of course, I'm going to go ahead and extend this homosexuality topic to maybe sexuality at large, or non-heteronormative sexuality at large. So this is sexuality where you do not have two people of the opposite sex in relationship with one another, which we know is very, very normative in the Bible. But when you're talking about non-heteronormative sexualities, there's really only one that's discussed, and it's not lesbianism. Lesbianism doesn't really come up in the text at all, except in one text in the Greek New Testament, which we'll go over a little later. But it doesn't really show up at all in the Old Testament at all. But homosexuality does. And I think that what I want to do in helping you, through this webinar, help you better understand this topic, is I want to just provide to you the evidence, the text, and I want to leave it up to you to reconcile with the text. This is often what we do here at ABI. We're not interested in telling you what we think. We're enforcing upon you beliefs that we have. As instructors, all of our instructors come from very different ways of life, and we do not always agree. Certainly not. But we are more so interested in bringing the Bible to you and freeing you to ask questions, to interrogate the text, to feel free to interrogate God, because God loves questions, and to wrestle with these texts on your own. And that's what I'm really going to do here. I'm going to let you know where these texts are. Most of where these texts are. There's a few references that I will not go to, but I will let you know where they are. And then I'm going to free you to make decisions on your own as to what you do with these texts. But I'm not going to do that without helping you to think through questions that you should probably consider. So this first text, and let me just grab my Bible, comes from Leviticus. And there are things that people read in the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, and that they take very matter-of-factly, but it is less the case that they're reading more than one or two verses, and that's sad. So I'm going to show you the danger in this one text that thinks through homosexuality. So we all know that there were two texts in Leviticus that discuss this. And these two texts are really interested in just sexual relations in itself. So it's not just, there's not a whole chapter on men not sleeping with men, right? It's more so a whole chapter on types of people who are off limits, like you can't sleep with your father's daughter, you can't sleep with your father's wife daughter, you can't sleep with your father's wife, you can't sleep with your, like all of the types of sexual activities that are prohibited are discussed there. You can't sleep with animals. All of that stuff shows up in this text. But then we get one verse on unlawful relationships between men. So I want to start off by reading the verse in Leviticus 20, and then I'll go backwards to Leviticus 18. So in Leviticus 20, we actually get, it's verse 13. It says, and I'm reading the New Revised Standard Version, if a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall be put to death. Their blood is upon them. So the issue here is the issue here is much, it seems to be apparent in this text that there might be larger issues here. The idea is a man lying with another man as he would a woman, right? It's not even, in this case, it might even suggest that the man is in a feminine position. And so this brings in gender politics and forces us to ask questions like, what are the norms of this society when it comes to gender? Let's think of those ideologies. How do men act in this society? How do women act? What does it look like for a man to be effeminate? Those types of questions are really important here. If you go into Leviticus 18, we don't get a price. We're just told it's an abomination. Versus Leviticus 20, we know that people will die. But Leviticus 18, and we're going to start at verse 22, and I'm going to keep reading all the way down to 28 or so. So it says, you shall not lie with a man or a male as you will, or as with a woman. It is an abomination. You shall not have sexual relations with any animal and defile yourself with it, nor shall any woman give herself to an animal to have sexual relations with it. It is a perversion. Now, this is the thing I want to acknowledge before moving on, because this isn't even what I want to emphasize here in this text. It's actually the next verse. But, we get, you shall not lie with a male as you would a woman. So the issue seems to once again be that some male is in a feminine position. That's at least what seems to be the case here. There is this idea of needing to emphasize that you were lying with a male as you would a feminine counterpart. But what's also apparent in this text is when it discusses not having sexual relationships with an animal, when it's presumably talking about a male audience, it says you shall not defile yourself with it, nor and now it's mentioning women, nor shall any woman give herself to an animal to have sexual relations with it. The idea, in the passive nature of a woman, right? Passive, the woman making an active choice to give herself over passively to an animal, which is really, really interesting, because you don't find that kind of passive language when you're talking about men engaging in sexual relations with one another or with animals. But I want to go to the next verse. Do not defile yourself in any of these ways, for by all of these practices, the nations I am casting out before you have defiled themselves. Thus the land thus the land became defiled, and I punished it for its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you shall keep my statutes and my ordinances and commit none of these abominations, either the citizen or the alien who resides among you. For the inhabitants of the land who were before you committed all of these abominations, and the land became defiled. Otherwise, the land will vomit you out for defiling it, as it vomited out the nations that were before you. Really important text here. We're not just talking about unlawful sexual relationships. We are talking about how you live successfully in a land. This land that God is giving them, right? The only way they can live successfully in this land is if they are performing certain rules. They're adhering to certain rules, and that includes adhering to rules against certain forms of sexual activity. And here, the idea is this is what those nations before you did, right? Which brings you a whole nother perspective. Hi, Seer Crystal. Please stay and engage, and feel free to ask any questions. Nonetheless, this is really important for us to acknowledge when we're talking about texts like this, because it is often the case that when you are trying to solidify a unique identity for yourself. It is not abnormal for a group to vilify or to compare who they are, who they want to be seen to be, with who others are. And we definitely see that here. The idea is you don't commit these acts because this is what the other nations did. And if you do this, guess what? This land is going to push you out just like, it's pushed these other people out. It's a larger polemic here. This isn't a text just about sex. We talk about this text in Bible, Sex, and Other Texts, by the way. And when you get a deeper understanding of what's happening in the Bible as a whole, this text kind of comes to life in ways that it doesn't necessarily when you're just reading a verse. But the poor thing is in reading this one verse, verse 22, when you're talking about homosexuality in itself, if you don't read the rest, you don't get the context, and you don't get the larger point that is being made here. I want to help you think about a few modern practices before going to the New Testament, because that's all for the Old Testament, really. I mean, there's the Sodom and Gomorrah event in Genesis 19, which does suggest that there are lewd sexual practices going on. But this is the thing. No one thinks about what's actually happening in the text. For example, the men are trying to be sexually active, and this also happens, by the way, in Judges, but the men are trying to be sexually active with angels, first off. And second off, no one actually critiques that Lot actually was willing to give this crowd, this violent crowd, his virgin daughters, over giving this violent crowd his visitors, who seem to be, in some ways masculine. There are issues in the text that people don't think about. Why would Lot do something like that? Well, first off, hospitality is really important to ancient Israelites. And there is a hierarchy. There were certain bodies that you can touch more than others, if that makes any sense. And the type of abomination for taking advantage of not just a man, but a stranger is what's at work here. So if anything, this text, the larger picture points to issues with hospitality. And a lot of people don't read the text that way, but it's because they don't really understand what's going on in ancient Israelite culture. Does it make a critique of, or does it identify lewd sexual practices? Totally. And this happens again in Judges chapter around 21, Judges 21, 19 to 21, I want to say, with the Levite and his concubine. The Levite is in the same position. He goes to his territory that, people that he would have presumably been a part of, to, stay the night. They let him in and offer great hospitality, but then you have people coming knocking at the door wanting to take him to gang rape him. And the father, who is taking care of this guy, who's let this guy into his home, does the same thing. He says, why don't you just take my daughter, essentially? And yeah, the crowd is not pleased, and the Levite pretty much throws his concubine out the door, and they gang rape her. So there's a lot of rough text here, but when you actually think about what happens later, it sheds more light on what happens in Genesis. It pretty much results in a civil war within Israel, and this civil war is because of violating laws of hospitality. So there's a much bigger picture to this. You can't read Genesis 19 without actually thinking about Judges. But if you don't know what happens in Judges, then you don't quite get the chance of deeply understanding Genesis 19. There's also, the whole Ham and Noah thing, which isn't a direct correlation with homosexuality, but some have viewed it to be a text that gets really close to it because Ham sees the nakedness of his father, and that seems to be a problem here. But you cannot read Ham seeing the nakedness of his father without reading Leviticus, reading it through the lens of Leviticus, because Leviticus argues in Leviticus 18 and 20 that when you sleep with your father's property, women, right? The wife, the daughters, you are like clothing and revealing the nakedness of a father. Or you sleep with somebody else's wife or someone else's daughter, you are in one way or another violating them. It's not a violation of the wife or the daughter, it's a violation of the man. You are unclothing him in so many ways, revealing his nakedness. So there's a much bigger picture here of how people are seeing bodies, and particularly how people are seeing male bodies. So you can't study any of this actually without thinking about gender politics. Let's go to the New Testament where it gets a little fun. I think I was going to talk to you about some more modern examples, but I'll just mention those later because I want to get into the New Testament. A lot of people also think about 1 Corinthians. You cannot not think about 1 Corinthians when you're talking about homosexuality, because Paul certainly talks about it, certainly. In particular, 1 Corinthians chapter 6, really great text here. And this is where I get to introduce you to the language of the text. So verse 9, I mean, it's pretty much a bulk of the chapter, but I want to start and I want to just read verse 9 for you. Yeah. So it says, do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. And now it's going to tell you who these wrongdoers are. They're the fornicators, the idolaters, the adulterers, the male prostitutes, the sodomites, the thieves, the greedy, the drunkards, the revilers, the robbers. And none of these people are going to inherit the kingdom of God. This is what 1 Corinthians is saying. What's interesting about this text is all of the words in the Greek that are used. So I'll just go through a few, not all of them, and I'm not going to read it to you in Greek, because if you don't know Greek, then that will be meaningless. And I'm not interested in displaying my smartness. I don't know. I'm not interested in that. But if you are interested in learning Greek, we do teach Greek here at Amana Bible Institute. And we are really, really gracious in how we teach it. Not a ton of memorization. We really just teach you how to utilize tools to help you deepen your understanding of Greek. And if you want to learn vocabulary, we certainly give it to you, and we give you vocabulary exams, but we do allow you to use a dictionary or a lexicon, because we want to make sure you know how to use tools to deeply understand the language of the text. Nonetheless, one of the words is used here. We know this word really well because it's how we get the term porn. It's pornos. And pornos just means whoring activity in so many ways. It's almost like the Hebrew zana. Or zona, the participle of the verb zana in Hebrew. Now, if you've been to these webinars before, you know what zana is. And if you've been to my classes before, specifically the classes on the Hebrew Bible or on sex in the Bible, you know what this word means. Zana is literally, or the zona is literally the participle of a term meaning whoring one, and you can do anything to be a whoring one. Almost, you could be worshiping idols in the Hebrew Bible, and you could be a whoring one. But you can also just have committed adultery. You could have slept with someone who's not your husband. Now you're a whoring one, and you could also be a prostitute and be a whoring one. So there's lots of ways to be a zona, and that's almost how it is with pornos or pornoi. The plural of the term, it literally just means whoring person. And that requires some unpacking. Lots of references in the Bible that utilize this term thinks of it as some form of unlawful sexual relations, and our English Bibles kind of call this fornication, right? But fornication even requires some unpacking. What is that? right? We have to really ask these questions. I think it is often the case that we think English is so easy, but when you learn another language, you realize English is a tough language, and we don't really fully understand, these terms that are being used. They have to be unpacked, and they have to be unpacked utilizing the context of the Bible. So there are a few things that are here that might be viewed as fornication. And it could be the unlawful sexual practices of Leviticus. It can be the unlawful sexual practices that are discussed in other aspects or other parts of the Bible, which includes adultery, and for Jesus includes looking at a woman with lust in your heart, and includes being a male prostitute and things of that nature. Another term that's used here is malakos. Love this word. It is one of my favorite words. And this is why, because the Greek historians use it, and it's always hilarious when they use it. It really just means gentle, soft. So this is the term you get in some Bibles interpreted as effeminate. Yeah. And what's interesting, which is why I love this word, when you're when you're reading these Greek historians, they actually utilize this term malakos, malakoi in the plural, to describe people based upon how they look and how they walk. So physiognomy is really a big thing in Greco-Roman texts. And what often happens is you can be a certain color and viewed as weak or malakos, right? Viewed as effeminate. You could, have gentle hands and now all of a sudden you're effeminate. You could walk a certain way and all of a sudden you're a malakoi, right? Or you're malakos, you're too effeminate. And the New Testament is using this term, which is wild. It just means you're soft, you're effeminate. And this might be in one way or another a segue into thinking about the people who are forced to be soft in this society, because there is a gender hierarchy. And I cannot stress that enough, you guys. We're talking about men or boys who are in some ways forced to be in effeminate positions. And this is a thing people don't think about when they're thinking about homosexuality, and whether it's lawful or not in the Hebrew Bible or in the Greek New Testament. There are people forced into these acts because these people are viewed less than human, like a slave. Slaves were used for sexual purposes, and it was legal because they are property. You can literally use a slave as a sex toy in the ancient world. And technically also here too, in the modern world, in the Western society. In addition to that, boys, it wasn't abnormal for boys to be used as, some form of sexual object here. And this is really, really something that occurred in the Greco-Roman world in one way or another, or was critiqued. There were lots of acts going on. There was pederasty, for example, which is when an older male pretty much grooms a younger male and grooms them, not just by teaching them things, but grooms them sexually. It's almost as if these younger men are enlightened and prepared to be men on account of their grooming from their older teacher in so many ways. And so in one way or another, what the New Testament might be doing here is the New Testament might be discussing, hi, Miss Felicia, how are you? Feel free to ask questions or make comments. This is a candid discussion. The New Testament here is, a lot of times people don't get how Christians are also in that pretty precarious situation where they're needing to be different from other people. They have to be different from the Greeks and Romans, even though many of them are Greeks and Romans. They also have to be different from Jews, even though many of them are Jewish, of Jewish heritage. They need to pave out an identity, a Christian identity that is not Jewish, because the Greeks and Romans think that Christians are Jews, and Christians are like, we're not Jews. We fast on these days and we go to church on those days. And Christians, Greco-Roman Jews, Christians are doing the same kind of thing. We're not a part of that climate. We're not a part of the world, right? Because we do these things or we don't do these things. And one of the things that Christians, that Paul is saying Christians don't do is they're not Malakoi. They're not effeminate. That's not how our men are. Another term that is here is moikos, and moikos really just means idolatry. But it can be used as a form of adultery. It could mean adultery as well. And this is the thing. It has this kind of cultic understandings or bent to it because moikos literally is the term that is used to describe when people are whoring against God. You don't worship those other gods, you're committing adultery against God. That's the idea here. But this text also uses the term, another term for idolatry, suggesting that when they are using moikos, they are actually really talking about adultery. Hi, Bobby. Feel free to join in, ask questions, make comments whenever you like. And another term that is used here in this text is arsenokoites, really long word in the Greek. And it comes from two terms, arain and koite. Koite is a term meaning lie down. Remember in the Hebrew Bible, the idea was a male lying with another male, right? That term lying, laying down on a bed, in a habitation, something like that. That's what koite means in the Greek. And arain just means male. So it's literally like male liar, like you're lying down with a male. Almost fairly identical to the Hebrew Bible when you think about it that way. And this is probably the only explicit term, if I have to be honest, in the Bible that specifically talks about men with men. The only one, and it's only used a few times. It's used in 1 Timothy 1 and 10, 1 Corinthians 6 and 9. And I'm trying to think of any other references that might use this. I think those might be the only times that this word is used, which is really interesting. I should also say this. There are other terms that are used. For example, there is this cluster of words, a small phrase. I'm going to mention just two in Romans 1:26 and 27. Let's actually read that text really quickly. Really famous text as well when we're talking about these kind of things. And please chime in whenever, Bobby or anyone on Facebook, on YouTube. What are we looking for? Romans. Not thinking. Okay, so it says, for this reason, God gave them up to degrading passions. That's the term there, degrading passions. I want to say in the KJV, it says something like vile affections. Their women exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural, and in the same way, also the men giving up their natural intercourse with women were consumed with passion for one another. Passion for one another, pathe, comes from the Greek word pathos, and really just it's more than just passion, you guys. It is what it describes. It could describe something like suffering. It is the experience that you live, right? You can talk about experience that you want to have, or experience that you might have on account of a job or developing a skill. But pathe is much deeper. It is deeply connected to your person because it is connected to your experience. And that includes your emotions, that includes your experiences of suffering, and it includes your passions. And that's how it's used here. And this is the only text, by the way, that discusses or even gets close enough to discussing lesbianism in the entire Bible. There are no other texts that really specifically discuss this. But this term, it's pathe atimias. And atimias is, when you think of time or timao in the verbal form, it literally just has everything to do with honor in the Greek. And the ah in front of it kind of negates it. So this is talking about dishonorable passions, dishonorable experiences. And when you're thinking about this idea of honor, I know you guys think of the whole masculinity thing, right? I know you guys think about you almost can't help it, right? There is a way that you honorably serve your gender, and that seems to be really important in the entire Bible. I want to acknowledge, because I study gender, and you see it time and time again, you guys, time and time again. Nonetheless, the issue is that people are giving in into dishonorable or degrading passions, shameful acts, essentially. And it is just left there for the most part. And then we get some descriptions of those shameful acts: women with women, men with men. Okay, so and there are other texts too, and I'll just mention these texts and I'll tell you what term they use. Pornos or porne, or excuse me, pornos or pornoi in the plural, it would be, is utilized in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 9 to 11, 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and 9, which we read, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 5, 1 Timothy chapter 1 and 10, which is also the text that has that actual term for what can be viewed as explicit homosexuality, men with men lying with men. Hebrews 12 and 16, Hebrews 13 and 4, and of course Revelations. So Revelation 21 and 8 and 22 and 15, you guys. There's also a text in Jude, you guys, Jude verse 7, or Jude 7 as it is called, that talks about the Sodom and Gomorrah incident and calls it sexual immorality, right? So there are Bible readers, and Paul does this a lot, who goes back to the Hebrew Bible and explains what's there. They're interpreting the text as they see it in for themselves. And the Sodom and Gomorrah incident is called sexual immorality explicitly in Jude 7. Now, what do you do with these texts? Oh, as I told you before, I just give you the data. What you do with it is on you, but I will give you some questions that you need to think about. As you see, these texts are not just simply texts that have laws that prohibit these types of sexual unions. They are texts that are immersed in the ideologies of the society. That includes the gender norms of the society, heavily so the gender norms, but also includes, number two, identity politics. How do you pave out an identity, that is unique and that is not like others? And oftentimes, you guys, and this happens today, you do this by saying, they do this thing, we're not going to do that, right? I can think of a few texts where this happens. I'll give you some ancient examples and some modern. So the Eleusinian mysteries in the Greece, or in the Greek population, or Greek times, ancient Greek times. What you find here is the Eleusinian mysteries was a mystery group or cult that was really, really interested in offering some bit of openness, and openness to all people, men and women, right? So the ability you could be a member, you don't have to adhere to a certain sex. It was also fairly cheap to be a member, so you could be poor, or somewhat poor and still be a part. Nonetheless, this group was vilified because of a number of reasons. And one of the things that you read in text is that this group performed or took part in orgies. This becomes the way to discredit in the ancient world. you know how we do with the whole political thing. You want to X out a competition. You acknowledge some dirt, you pull the skeletons out of the closet, and sometimes you say things that might not be true. This is what goes on here. People accuse these people of taking part in orgies. Livy does this, you guys, with Livy does this with the Bacchae, another mystery cult. He pretty much there are these narratives, and he discusses this narrative of how men are forced to take part in illicit sexual relations when they are part of this group. And it's often young men, and they drum it up, almost kind of like how white colonists drummed up what was happening in African traditional religion to kind of create this aura that these religious practices are wrong, right? They think about the drums in African traditional religions. Think about the drums of voodoo in Haiti, right? You vilify the drums. It's those drums, and people go into manic states, and they go crazy, and they're engaging in all of these sexual relations. That's pretty much what's happening with Livy. And Herodotus actually has these narratives of certain groups of people, including ancient Babylonians, who will pretty much pimp out their daughters before they're married. So they pretty much force their daughters to wait at the temple of Aphrodite. These are actually, I want to say, the Lydians. They wait at the temple of Aphrodite, and they will pretty much have to wait there until a man comes up to them, gives them a coin, has sex with them, and then they can get married, is the idea. And Herodotus kind of has a little funny quip in there where he's like, the ugly girls are there for a long time. They're there for months, stuck at the temple of Aphrodite, because all of the beautiful women are taken first, is the idea here. This is a way to talk about the lewd practices of another nation, the lewd practices of foreign groups, you guys, right? If you want to pave a way for yourself, you call an entity foreign, or their practice is foreign. And let's talk about modern examples. The Satanic Panic, you guys. When Satanism was made a thing here in the United States, one of the things that people did is they just assumed things of them. They're cannibals. They go and steal children, and they participate in illicit sexual relations. And earlier on, when Satanism first came out, Satanism more so came out as almost like a satire, like a satiristic kind of faith, almost kind of laughing at religion in so many ways, creating a religion to laugh and mock religion. So there were some of these acts that weren't quite these things were not quite true. It's not abnormal for people to other, or to make things foreign, or to make things prohibited on account of trying, or their attempts to pave out and to strengthen an identity. We see this all over the Bible. There's genocide in the Hebrew Bible, you guys. God sanctions genocide in the Hebrew Bible in Joshua. And this is often done in so many ways because the foreign people are a threat. Their religion and how they worship, how they live is a threat. Did the genocide happen the way that it happens? Archaeological data suggests that it did not. And the Hebrew Bible also suggests that it didn't either. When you go to Judges, you read that they did not kill all of the Canaanites. So even the text will tell you that it doesn't, but then it forces you to ask questions like, why are these texts here? Why are these stories written the way that they are written? What are they really trying to say? Right? You cannot always read things at face value. Sometimes you literally have to read between the lines when you were reading the Bible and life in general. You got to read between the lines when you read in your next door neighbor, or your mother, or your sister, or your roommates. You have to almost hear what they're not saying. But what makes it easier for us to do that for people here in the modern world is because we are of their culture. We understand in so many ways a little bit of how they think. And it makes it really, really hard for us to do that with people in the Hebrew Bible or the Greek New Testament, because that world is not ours. We don't get it. And they are believing things and seeing themselves in ways that we do not see ourselves today. So, these are some of the questions that you want to interrogate, or ways that you want to interrogate the text. You want to ask, what's at work in this text? What are the norms of this society? What's occurring historically? What's occurring in the social context? What are the nations doing? Becomes a good question. Where are Christians in their identity when Paul is writing in First Corinthians? And you can actually get some of the answers to these questions because there are countless texts and countless sources where scholars can kind of give you an idea of the landscape of the ancient Near East and of the Greco-Roman world. I'm just looking here at my bookshelf to recommend some texts here. This New Testament text, it is by Bart Ehrman, A Brief Introduction to the New Testament. This is actually one of the texts that we use in our New Testament course. Is a great survey, gives you, there's a great index and a great table of contents, but will give you enough information about the context that produced the different books of the New Testament. And I often utilize Coogan for Old Testament. And it is this one right here. It is an Old Testament survey by Michael Coogan, and it does the same thing, but it does it for the books of the Old Testament, excuse me, and does it quite masterfully. Now, these books are not the easiest to read, so you will have to take your time, but they're also not hard reads either, and you're going to have to approach them with an open mind, right? And you have to engage and ask questions of all sources, right? You got to interrogate them all. But understanding the context of these texts is the first step to deeply understanding how to tackle these texts and where to go, how to think about them, how to properly wrestle with these texts and reconcile with them if reconciliation is possible. And whether that's possible will heavily depend on you. Cord, thanks for coming. Did you want to add anything?
No. I mean, I think I'm just jumping in, but this is so good. I'm like, oh my God, like where was I at for the first half an hour? uh, but no, I just think, even from a practical standpoint, you know, the more you dive in and you dig into this, and this is I guess this is the preacher, maybe even the pastor coming out of me, well, maybe the rebel pastor coming out of me.
You
But
love the
even
rebel pastor.
that is my title. I am the rebel pastor, because I challenge tradition, and I challenge the stuff that we grow up in, believing in church. And so the more you dive into this stuff, the more you will see that a lot of the dogmatism, a lot of the things that we have believed, the strong dogma, the very strong theology is really a false theology that have come from listening to what Grandmama Nam taught us from back in the day, or what, Reverend such and such now said when he was in his prime in the 70s and the 80s. A lot of the times you will at first be offended because it will challenge what you have always believed. It will challenge how you've always believed this, quote unquote. And so, I just tell people, learn the word for yourself. Learn, you have to know, like you said, you got to be able to read in between the lines, and you have to understand context. And when you start doing that, excuse me, I'm sorry. When you start doing that, you now you've opened yourself up, for deeper knowledge and for greater revelation, and it will change your walk. It will change, it not necessarily your relationship with God, but it will change your worldview because it will challenge what you believe. It will challenge your own theology. But that's not a bad thing. They teach us, oh, don't go to school, or don't learn this, or don't learn that because you're gonna stop believing in God. That's not true. If anything, it's going to deepen your understanding of God. So many times we believe and we ask questions. Well, why didn't this happen, or why didn't God do this, or and we take our own lives and we protect our theology of God, right? Our worldview of how things should go, or why God should do this, or why God should not do this, or why He did do this, or why He didn't do that. And a lot of it comes from our teaching. It just comes from just the understand not really having a true basic understanding of scripture. And so this understanding of scripture really will debunk a lot of those myths and a lot of those preconceived notions that are unmerited and unwarranted. And so I love it. I love it. Keep teaching, girl. Keep teaching.
Thanks so much. And I agree with everything you're saying. I think what you're saying is especially helpful when you are forced to acknowledge that there are things the Bible does not talk about, right?
Right.
There's a lot of things that the Bible doesn't talk about that we're told the Bible says. And if you read it for yourself and you realize, hey, that's not really there. And then you're forced to think about, what does God really think about these things? If Christianity is encouraging personal relationships with God, then we also must acknowledge that people grow in their understanding of God in their own timing and in very different ways. And what that means, in one way or another, that what might be lawful for you might not be lawful for the person next to you. And that has to be okay, because we're all seeing God differently. And I think understanding, or going to school or taking a course like our introduction to the Hebrew Bible course, which we are actually offering in August, you guys. I think it starts around August 1st. Taking a course like that gives you a survey of the entire Old Testament, will give you an idea of how God changes for people. It is truly, belief in God, perspectives of God is truly an individual thing. And if not an individual person thing, certainly an individual group thing, right? When you're reading the Hebrew Bible, for us, it is certainly an individual person thing. But for them, we're reading the voices of the elite and their groups of people who are believing certain things, like they're believing certain things about their deity. And those perspectives are drastically different in the Hebrew Bible and in the Greek New Testament too. Jesus is different in all four Gospels. All of these writers are seeing Jesus differently, and they're recording their differences. You can read them. If you really read the text, you'll see that Jesus is different. Jesus is super Jewish in Matthew, but Jesus is a warrior for the marginalized in Luke. Jesus goes after the marginalized in Luke. It and the Jesus of John um, is a revelator. I mean, in some ways, Jesus in all of the Gospels, there are revelatory aspects, but the Jesus of John in so many ways is steeped in this really, really, I would say, this need to understand, or to read more deeply into identity politics, to read more deeply into what some of these larger themes actually mean. Like, what is baptism? One of the things that stands out to me is not just the beginning of John, but the end of it. John 21, Jesus repeats to Peter, do you love me? What is the response? Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. There's the same words are used, but there's something else that is at work in Peter, something that we don't quite understand when we're just reading the text. There is something that's happening behind the scenes that you only get a chance, a small little bit of window to experience for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so so yeah, God is different in almost every book to different people. And as long as we're willing to see that and understand that, I think we'll be fine, even with a topic like sexuality in the Bible, understanding that the texts are here. I gave you almost all of the text. Now, What you do with it is on you, but you also have to be open to what others do with it. And there are people who are capable of reconciling with these texts and freeing themselves to partake in and be who they believe themselves to be. And that's completely fine. Hi, cuz. So great to see you. Hi, Mom. Thank you so much, Seer Crystal Smith. And thank you for sharing. And I think there's a comment here in the classroom. Thank you, Bobby. Are there any biblical texts that can be interpreted as affirming same gender loving relationships? Man, yes. Yes. The relationship between David and Jonathan, man, they got a bromance going on. They got a real true bromance going on. Now, how you read this as affirming same gender loving relationships is up to you, right? But there are tons of texts that have been read through what in biblical studies is called like queer hermeneutics. It's read through the lens of queer hermeneutics. And really, when they're thinking about queer, they're not just thinking about, being gay or being non-heteronormative. They're thinking about not fitting neatly into boxes, right? For example, asexual people, they don't have sexual feeling or desire. They're called queer because they don't fit neatly into sexual boxes. Do they always call themselves queer is a whole nother question, but they do show up in the LGBTQ plus community. They're the A after the I in the LGBTQ acronym itself. So they certainly show up as being queer. It just means not fitting tightly into boxes or into spaces. It's almost like, I think it's Sarah Ahmed thinks of it as like I think like a square peg going into a circular platform or something like that. It's the discomfort that is created from not being able to sit in places comfortably. But yes, in the David and Jonathan narrative is certainly read through the lens of queer hermeneutics. I can't think of any others. I don't read a whole lot of queer hermeneutics, but I can direct you though to sources that will help you find other texts. But yeah, lots of ways to read the Bible. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? No problem, Bobby. Okay. Well, Cord, you got anything else?
No, I am good. Yeah, I'm excited. We're gonna have to have this one again. And I'm gonna have to be here on time.
It is also on YouTube and Facebook Live, so feel free to catch the replay if there's something that you missed or if you want to re-listen. Right now, I'm showing you our page that is actually being pinged from the Philippines right now. So if you're on from the Philippines, hi, how are you? We offer so many different courses. We offer new courses every single month, and we also offer webinars, free webinars, and a free course. One of the things that I've been actively advertising recently is our free course, Bible Language Tools on Online Resources. I'm going to go through how to use free online resources to help deepen your biblical study. That means I'm going to teach you word studies. I'm going to teach you how to do comparative analyses. I'm going to teach you what it means to look at context and give you some sources, some sites that will help you with context. And I'm going to teach you how to think and ask deeper questions that will help you do an exegetical focus or think about a theological reflection that is actually fair to the text. I teach you how to allow the text to speak to you. And then after you do that process, you're free to allow, to work with the text, to do eisegesis, because eisegesis isn't necessarily wrong. But in this particular course, I teach you how to do exegesis. And it is free, absolutely free, 4 weeks. Meets on Saturdays starting August 7th from 11 to 12. Now, some courses that we are offering right now, they start next week. Cord is on the line right now. He teaches marketplace ministries. That course is going to meet on Wednesdays. We have prophetic artistry. This course meets on Thursdays. I will be teaching that one. Misreading Jesus and Paul. Professor Onika Stewart will be teaching this course. It meets on Fridays. And last but not least, Prophets and Prophecy in the Bible. Really excited about this course. And, you know, we do have some people who are going to register who could use some conversation partners. So go ahead and register for that. It meets on Saturdays, 4 Saturdays starting July 3rd. So 1 week from today, meets at 11. This is the thing, you guys. These courses have different prices. If you enroll by just paying by course, it's $70. But if you enroll into a certificate program, you can get the course for as little as $44 a month. And if you enroll in a grow plan, you can get the course for as little as $60, and you just be consistently taking courses with us. Or you can, there might be a session that you're more so interested in. So if you're interested, for example, in that introductory section that I will teach, what is prophecy? How do prophets exist in a more general overview in the Bible? You might want to just pay $18 and enroll in just that one session. You can do that with all of our courses, and Professor Cord will be the one to determine whether you can do that in his marketplace ministry course. So we will update the website for you, and if it's possible, you would see this $18 fee for a drop-in course. Other than that, we do have some webinars as usual approaching. So our next webinar is on Introduction to Kingdom Entrepreneurship, taught by Professor Cord here. So please do come out and hear what he has to say. Then we're going to talk about human presence as partners in creation on July the 10th. This is going to be taught by me, and I'm really big on thinking about the human as an active agent, and specifically the human as a partner with God. And we're going to talk about how we can partner with God and creation in order to better the world. So, and we're going to talk about how this is at work in the Bible, because there are many texts that discuss this that we often ignore or disregard. Last but not least, the last webinar in July will be one on female agency in biblical text, and it is like this one. It is a real talk webinar, so we're just going to have some instructors here, and we're just going to randomly talk. And boy, is there so much to say about female agency in the Bible. I might have discussed just a little bit of that today in discussing, this Leviticus 18's idea that a woman is actively giving herself over to be a passive sexual agent and with animals, and that being wrong or improper. And with men, that's not really there. So there is something in the text. There's so much in biblical text that thinks of women as passive agents. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. So, if no other questions, I hope you guys have an excellent day, and thank you so much for coming.